Hey, fellow pastors, McKay here. And as you might know from experience, one of the most underdeveloped elements in sermon prep is transitions. They just don't seem that important. They're these little statements that connect parts of the message, and we can just extemporaneously connect those, right? Well, maybe, but usually no, because transitions are like gears in a car, and gears are important. And now I realize we don't think about gears as much because we drive automobiles with automatic transmissions that shift themselves. But my first car, well, actually a pickup truck, was a manual transmission where you had to actually shift the gears yourself with a clutch on the floorboard. Now, there's a beauty in riding with someone who can smoothly shift through the gears because you can actually feel the momentum building as speed increases, and each shift of the gear like propels you forward a little bit. And that's how a sermon should feel, not like disconnected points. We want our listeners to feel the movement, the gospel movement, that we are going somewhere and we're making progress. And we call that gospel momentum because that's what we are doing with every sermon. We're taking them to and through the cross of Jesus. Now, if you're riding with someone who, let's say, is not as skilled at shifting the gears on a manual transmission, then you know that it's not a great experience. The car bucks, the gears grind, noises that are somewhat annoying. And the same is true with preaching. You'll either preach with momentum that shifts smoothly from movement to movement, or you'll unintentionally grind the gears, creating friction that doesn't need to be there. Now, that's why Preach 360 pays attention to transitions. Rather than a three-point model, we mirror the gospel story with movements that follow the creation, fall, redemption, and restoration arc, that framework of Scripture. We call it PPGR because we call those terms principle, problem, gospel, and response. A PPGR sermon is crafted from four interconnected movements that are intended to flow seamlessly from one to the next as we build that gospel momentum. And in the same way that you really have to practice learning how to drive a stick shift, you have to learn how to create these transitions in sermons. They are small, but they are so important to the flow of the entire message and how the sermon is received. That's why I built training wheels into Preach 360, some basic transitions to help you get started. So here's how they might work. From text to the principle, we can say, this passage teaches us, and then our principle statement. From the principle movement now developed to the problem, however, the problem is, see, the passage teaches us, and then we go to the principle and develop it. However, the problem is, then we state our problem statement and then develop that. Then we move from problem to gospel. The good news is, so the passage teaches us, the problem is, the good news is, and then moving finally to the response, now in view of the cross or in view of God's grace or in union with Jesus, and then we lay out the response statement and develop the application as grace-motivated and Spirit-empowered change. Essentially, we want our transitions to be clear and purposeful, not clunky and extemporaneous, as great as maybe your extemporaneous transitions are. If you preach to the same folks pretty much week in and week out, you want to add variety. So instead of always saying, this passage teaches us, try out one of these. We could say, the core truth in this text is, or the fundamental reality God is teaching us here is, or if there's one thing that we need to glean from this text, it is, and then that goes into the principle statement. Instead of always saying the problem is, maybe try, but here's where it gets hard for us, moving from the principle to the problem. Or if we're honest, we really resist this truth. Or maybe, yet we know the pain of failing at this very thing. And maybe instead of the good news is, consider a few alternatives such as, but it doesn't have to be this way, as we move from the problem to the gospel. But God didn't leave us to despair. Or this is where the story takes a stunning and unexpected turn. You can see we're trying to create movement from one to the next, from the principle, the problem with the gospel, and then to the response. And there are other helpful ways to transition between movements. You can use your anchor illustration as a hinge. Let's say you told a story about a bridge and the bridge had collapsed. You could talk about how what has been broken created a chasm, but now we see how Jesus is going to build the span, moving from the problem to the gospel statement. Or the text itself may provide transitions for turning from the principle, problem, gospel response. Sometimes the passage has that own built-in pivot, like a but or a therefore or a shift in tone. So lean into that. Let the text own architecture guide the movement and how you even create your transitions. You may want to transition with a question, rhetorical questions. Tend to engage listeners and create natural bridges from one movement to the next. For example, so if that's God's design, why do we struggle with it so much? Moving from principle to problem, or moving from problem to gospel. What did Jesus do about this universal human dilemma? However you structure your transitions, the goal is for your congregation, your listeners, whatever your context, to feel the movement of the gospel story. And with practice, your transitions really will become invisible threads. They're able to pull your listeners through the sermon and its redemptive arc, so they actually get to experience the fullness of God's grace. Now, I've already mentioned all this is built into Preach 360, our online sermon studio that functions like a Socratic coach, walking you with questions simply through the sermon prep process, step by step from beginning to end. So if you need any help with this or anything else, then check out preach360.com. If it can help, I would be delighted. Reach out to me with any questions too. My name is McKay, and I look forward to seeing you next time.